Paris Perspective.
Russia's military is to create 20 new units to be operational in the country's west to counter what it claims is a growing threat from NATO. According to Moscow, upcoming military exercises will also be conducted jointly with Belarus, which they say will be exclusively defensive in character. Now, speaking on Monday, Russia's Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu pointed to a growing number of flights by US strategic bombers near Russia's borders, the deployment of NATO warships, and increasingly frequent and major drills by the North Atlantic Alliance forces that, what he says, destroy the international security system, forcing Russia's hand to take relevant countermeasures. Now, in response to that, NATO's Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg noted that Russia, over the last years, has invested heavily in new modern military capabilities, from conventional to nuclear weapon systems, and has been willing to use military force against its neighbours in Georgia and Ukraine. Now, this all comes after Russia doubled down on its political support for Belarus, which diverted a Ryanair plane from Greece to Lithuania last week as part of a ruse to arrest a dissident journalist, Roman Protasevich, and his girlfriend, Sofia Sapega. Now, the EU denounced the flight's diversion as piracy and responded by barring Belarusian flag carrier from its airspace and advising European airlines to avoid flying over the country altogether. Now, to take a look at the bigger picture in relations between the West and between Russia's sphere of influence in the East, and potentially the role of France and what France has to play in mediating between the two blocs, I'm joined today by Oleg Kobtzeff, who's Associate Professor of History and Politics at the American University in Paris. Thank you very much for joining me today on Paris Perspective, Oleg.
Thank you.
Okay, now let's just look at the events of last week. This is why I wanted to talk to you today. Moscow, and a spokesperson for the Kremlin last week, called out the EU and the US's outrage over the Protasevich arrest as double standards. Now, this was pointing to the fact that back in 2013, after a visit to Moscow by Bolivian President Evo Morales, his jet was forced to land in Austria because it was thought that Edward Snowden, the dissident American, one could say, might have been on board. And this was under the Obama administration. So is Moscow right in saying that there are double standards at play here?
Well, unfortunately, yes. But I would say that the affair of Moscow supporting Belarus and Lukashenko, the dictator Lukashenko, is essentially an internal Belarusian, Russian or Muscovite Minsk affair. It's essentially the strategy here is to defend Lukashenko, to make him more dependent on Moscow. That's what this is about. Because Lukashenko, if you remember, a year ago, he was almost completely out of control. And he was acting in a very dangerous way for Moscow. He was, if you remember, he was arresting alleged mercenaries, allegedly on Belarusian territory in order to topple him, or that's what Lukashenko had accused Moscow of doing. So you were wondering, where were the loyalties of Lukashenko just a year ago? It seems actually that Russia was preparing to replace Lukashenko with more reasonable candidates. It's those who pretty much ended up as presidential candidates and very quickly in jail or in exile. And there seems like that there was a tug of war between Putin and Lukashenko. And Lukashenko was a troublemaker for Moscow since at least 2014. But now precisely is an excellent opportunity to bring him back under control. Into the fold. He's done something extremely dangerous and stupid. But by defending him, that makes him completely, again, a vassal of the Kremlin.
Well, indeed. I mean, Putin's reaction to that whole flight debacle was to call an immediate summit with Alexander Lukashenko in Sochi. We've got great images of them both on a yacht, looking all very, very palsy-walsy, if you will. But it also underlined that Russia will not condone, well, anything like people power following last year's election in Belarus, or anyone else pushing around a vassal state. That would be the EU potentially. I mean, that would set a bad example for Putin back in Moscow. But Is that the best way of looking at it? He can't have this on his doorstep.
They could. A year ago, I was actually saying in the media that the Kremlin, I still believe that is true, the Kremlin was actually trying to control the crowds, to bring the crowds in a way that they would direct the crowds towards candidates and elites and people who were actually going to play ball with Moscow. This is not new. This was a Soviet strategy. Gorbachev did that with Romania. How quickly, in fact, Ceausescu was replaced with Ion Iliescu, who was exactly the kind of person that Moscow needed, and actually that guaranteed a very smooth, in fact, transition from communism to a milder form of socialism or whatever, but certainly not. Romania did not immediately become a pro-Western country. It postponed that strategy, postponed it. Same thing. The same thing happened in other places in the world. They try, and in this case, I am absolutely positive that Moscow tried actually to direct the crowds as a tool either against Lukashenko, if Lukashenko wasn't going to behave, or for him as a tool of negotiation.
So
Putin made his choice. Putin made his choice for Lukashenko, but once again, I think this piracy affair showing that Lukashenko is an amateur in global affairs is extremely dangerous and even, I would say, incompetent, allows him to actually, put him in front of his responsibilities and say, all right, now you play ball, now you play with the professionals.
So despite 20 years,
you do what you're told, or we'll just leave the West do what the West usually does with dictators.
So this is the fault of what happens after 27 years in isolation as Europe's last dictator.
Yeah.
So basically, if the writing was on the wall for the Russians that Lukashenko was no longer a viable candidate, they would have ousted him and put one of their other favorites in,
what
if you will.
I think, though, what may have happened also that gave a little bit more credibility to Lukashenko in the eyes of the Kremlin was that possibly the different leaders of the opposition who evidently had, it's absolutely clear that they had very strong ties to the Kremlin. It's absolutely evident. But they may have started to have some personal ambitions and thinking about, maybe negotiating with the West once they would be in power. That's also a possible scenario. And look at what support they got once, they were in exile in the Baltic states or elsewhere. So that might confirm that they may have started becoming a little bit more ambivalent and less under the control of the Kremlin, which would also explain why Putin made his choice eventually for Lukashenko.
Well, indeed, we're talking about power and power struggles here. And let's look more towards where we are in the European Union. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, her power is definitely waning. She's coming to the end of her mandate as Chancellor. And the EU, the European Union, let's face it, over the last 5 years has been completely distracted by Brexit. And then that was then compounded by the COVID pandemic here among, now trying to deal with the rollout of vaccines across the 27 countries across the bloc. So let's just say over the last 5 years of, 4 years, but coming up to 5 years of Emmanuel Macron's mandate, he was looked at as the great white knight to defend Europe's interest with Merkel on the descent, the EU distracted, and he was going to be the face of, the EU in trying to face down Russian, I won't say aggression, but muscle flexing. Are they right? Is Macron the great white knight that could face down Russia? And what does Putin think about Macron's role in basically as one of the chief leaders of the EU bloc?
Macron has certain assets, in fact. Is he already a great white knight? Probably not, but not yet. The opportunity is there. One, because Angela Merkel, as you just said, is on her way out. It's the end of her reign, and she was the great buffer between Russia and the West of the rest of the EU, and I would say even the rest of the West. She was the great conciliator, the great mediator. She had this very strong and strategic role. And remember, she was Eastern European.
She grew up in the Soviet bloc.
She speaks fluently Russian. Putin speaks fluently German. That's one of the many details that explains, that kind of illustrates the situation. But of course, there's much more than that. There's the Nord Stream and so forth.
Yes, the pipeline.
But she is on her way out, and the future of German power is uncertain. Especially since, in fact, remember that Merkel right now is in power, but it's a very fragile coalition. Now, Macron. So that's asset number one for Macron. There's a throne there that is going to be empty very soon. It's already almost empty. The second asset of Macron is the French Quai d'Orsay, the French institutions of foreign policy, of foreign affairs, which is an asset in French soft power anyway, worldwide. It's been like that for decades.
Culturally through the Francophonie, but obviously
not only
through
culturally, but
also through other
economically and simply diplomatically. And remember that Macron was part of François Hollande's government. And in fact, François Hollande did a lot more for East-West relations when the whole Ukrainian crisis began several years ago. In fact, he, much more than Angela Merkel, advanced the Minsk agreements and the Normandy format. Mm-hmm. He was the real artisan of that, in fact. And so you won't see this or hear about this much in the media. I have this really from the sources, from those who were there in Minsk. He's the one who really did the homework. And so the Minsk Accords or the Normandy format didn't result in anything particularly interesting. It could have been much worse. And that is what Hollande prevented. He prevented the situation deteriorating and getting much worse, in fact.
And to just briefly explain the Normandy format, this is bringing together, I think it was on the 70th anniversary of World War II.
Yes,
that's what it's based on.
Right.
On bringing to the table, who is it exactly?
So you had Poroshenko, the president of Ukraine. Mm-hmm. You had François Hollande. You had Putin, of course. So you could see what was interesting. If you remember in 2014. You could see Putin and Poroshenko talking to each other as they were waiting for the parades or the ceremonies to begin. And you had, of course, the White House that was represented there. So that was the Obama administration. Let's not forget who was the vice president. It was Biden. Mm-hmm. So that's an important factor in looking at who's playing at the poker card at this moment. And again, I repeat, Macron was also François Hollande's Minister of Economics. In 2014, I don't remember exactly whether he was already appointed there or he had resigned. But he was still very much a member of the government. Mm-hmm. And this is someone who, of course, he's an excellent politician for the internal politics of France. A kid like that, a 30-something-year-old kid, could not have become president without extremely strong backup and a whole apparatus of people in power, and that includes certainly people in the Quai d'Orsay. He could use that. I
remember speaking to colleagues of ours and also people like yourself, great academics, talking about it's an interesting time when the world was looking on to the elections back in 2017, and all of the left wing were banking on a Rothschild banker taking over over anyone but the far right. But indeed, now, well, let's just skip away from you. You've told us there about how François Hollande, Macron's predecessor, was much more of an appeaser to Moscow during the Crimea crisis. But what common ground do Paris and Moscow have today? When they're at the table, what cards are playing for both of the teams from Moscow and Paris?
Well, first of all, there's trade. There's a lot. It's not Paris and Moscow is certainly not Paris and New York or Paris and Tokyo, but still if I remember, France is in the top 10 among the economic partners of Russia for exports and imports. There are lots of other projects.
Massive investment. I mean, there's a 15 billion at least of French investment into the country.
Which explains, by the way, that there is a small but not insignificant pro-Russian lobby in France.
I've met a few of them.
Sorry, yes.
I've met a few of them.
I'm sure you have.
Very compelling individuals, but yes.
Some are very open, about it, like Mariani, legislator Mariani. There have been rumors that François Fillon was one of them, but less open. Maybe it's not. I wouldn't confirm it. These are rumors, but there is, especially on the right wing.
Yeah.
And on the far left also, there are, let's say, in the
Mélenchon camp.
In the Mélenchon camp. And of course, among the communists, even slightly further left, the communists are still there. And they're certainly not happy about the evolution of the world against Russia, becoming very anti-Russian over the past 30 years. So there is support here. There is Moscow has some soft power that it could use, but again, there are other. You asked me about common interests. So of course, there are great common interests. I know this from experience because I worked in this industry when I was very young, when I was still a graduate student. It's the space industry, for example. You have the CNES, le Centre National d'Études Spatiales, National Center for Space Studies, which is the French NASA, but also by association ESA, the European Space Agency, and the Soviet ET have been cooperating since the early 1960s, 1962, if I remember. So this that is one of the aspects of very important common industrial interests. There's lots of other
and they run
common interests in software, hardware.
And of course, because of, as you say, the communist bloc that was here in France, even post-revolutionary Russia, it was still a very strong aspect, and even went through the Cold War barriers, and it continued. So the still waters run very deep here. Now, let's just have a look on a more geopolitical side of things, where Moscow and France may or may not have common ground. I mean, we have Syria, we have this ongoing conflict in Syria. We have also Libya, but that's another day's conversation with all of these international imperialist interests there. But looking at Syria, I mean, Russia is very much the gatekeeper with what happens in Syria, be it for the Iranians to come in to help, especially when they're charging up in northern and the port there in northern Syria, and also there's the relations with Recep Tayyip Erdogan just north of the border in Turkey. Now, obviously, they were at a rock bottom between Moscow and Turkey when there was a plane shot down. But very quickly after the coup attempt, the two strongmen came very much together. Oh, yes. Now,
may I interrupt? That plane going down was very characteristic of how close Turkey and Russia have become over the past 25 years. It's the great crisis that showed actually how solid the ties had already become. That was already almost 10 years ago.
Yes.
So to me, this was in fact not at all a sign of how deteriorated were the relations
Well, there were
between
signs. Were there signs
Ankara
of
and
Turkish?
Moscow.
There were signs of Turkish frigates being pointed towards Crimea to look after the Tatars. I mean, now, was this all part of a little bit of a flexing manipulation to keep the home crowd?
Yes,
going,
it's a game to show we are. Let's say when Erdogan when Erdogan shot down the plane, it's to say, all right, let's not be too chummy, my friend. We're becoming friends, but I'm. We're not married yet.
Gotcha. But the thing is, though, what I wanted to get at with you, I mean, we're talking about that was maybe a low point, but you said it was interesting. Yes. That was just a minor spot in 25 years of close.
It proved that they already had everything needed to resolve that kind of crisis.
But here in France, Franco-Turkish relations are now definitely at a rock bottom, and it's a personality clash between President Macron and Erdogan himself. Now, Putin himself. He tries to run with the hares and chase with the hounds here. What does Putin think of this spat between France and Erdogan? And would he look at Putin himself, as a deal maker, a bridge builder between Turkey and France?
Definitely. As much as Erdogan sees himself as a broker between not only France and Moscow, but also
but Putin
Moscow
isn't ambivalent to this spat, is he? He plays. He plays the inscrutable card.
Absolutely, but being ambivalent is part of the strategy.
Yeah, sure.
It's like playing poker. Same thing, but that's the game also played by Erdogan. Although Erdogan has been, you mentioned the problem between France and Turkey. It's not just the problem between, let's say, Paris and
the personalities,
the man in charge of Turkish power at the moment. There is a narcissistic injury that has been sustained by the entire Turkish people, especially after Sarkozy, when it became absolutely clear that Turkey would never join the EU.
He was I think it was his Hungarian roots that really kicked back against Turkish influence in Europe.
There was always France was very divided about Turkey. You had those who were for letting Turkey into the EU. There were, I would say that there were very solid arguments for that. We would have much less problems with Turkey today if that could have happened.
Yes.
We would have other problems on the other side as well. How would we be dealing with would the Turks really be playing ball in Kurdistan, or would the EU now be on a border with Iraq? So you can understand the other side. But Sarkozy and the anti-Turkish lobby went very far. There was a very strongly anti-Turkish, I would say, maybe with some racism.
Sure, I mean that
really made a difference in foreign policy and built a wall between the EU and Turkey, made it impossible for Turkey to enter the EU. Once the Turks in general understood that, they began that favored Russia, for example. That definitely explains the rapprochement between Turkey and Russia, which began in the late 1990s.
And looking to, the whole spat that we've seen recently in Belarus, we've opened our conversation today about these, the Russian reaction to what is perceived as NATO expansionism, and of course Russia. Putin is basically saying, not in my backyard. This is our sphere of influence. Now, let's look at Russia's rising influence in what would traditionally have been France's sphere of influence, and that, of course, is in West Africa. In the Central African Republic, we've got mercenaries who are out there, but Russian mercenaries that are there, but of course, it's very much a part of the ancien précaré. This is very much France's colonial stomping ground. How is this perceived by Paris? Is this an opportunity for cooperation with the Russians, or is it looked at as an antagonistic infraction on their territory? Traditionally, their territory, I want to say.
From a traditional point of view, I would clearly identify many French specialists in foreign policy and African policy, and particularly those who are really still in charge of the France-Afrique system. In other words, the neo-colonial soft and sometimes hard power exercised over African countries.
The business old boys network. Yeah.
I would say that Russian presence is just as threatening to them as East German troops in Mozambique or Angola or elsewhere.
So we're going back to Cold War politics.
I think this could go to Cold War politics, except that Africans are beginning to be tired of France-Afrique. They're wondering, what's in France-Afrique for them. So yes, always for the dictators.
Anyone to break the monopoly, basically. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're getting tired of it, and they're shopping around for other opportunities. So that's how the Chinese got into the game, actually on a much greater scale than the Russians. But they're also looking at Russians for some power. Here, I would say that the French foreign policy institution, the Quai d'Orsay, would certainly perceive the situation as threatening.
And very finally, Oleg, we've got there's going to be a summit that's coming up, I think, on the 16th of June between Vladimir Putin and Joe Biden. One of the main things that's going to be on the table will be the Iran nuclear deal, which France was instrumental in brokering, along with Russia and the US, and of course the UK, EU, Germany, etc. What do you expect to come out of that summit?
That's the great unknown. The good news is that there is going to be a summit, that actually Biden can talk to Putin and vice versa. Honestly, I've been monitoring all of the great specialists' opinion about this. All are unanimous in saying that there's a great question mark, that it's
we'll watch that space.
50-50 chance. It might go well, it might go bad.
Oleg Kobtzeff, thank you very much for joining me today. We're going to leave it at that. We could be on all day to speak about such great questions. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, David. Thank you very much.